Welcome to r/RedditRevenge. This is a story of someone getting back at someone with revenge after being wronged. And today we have two great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story. My grandmother's brother didn't receive an inheritance because he was a bad man. The second story. New neighbors were annoying a-holes that made my mom's life a living hell. The third story. A-hole parked in my place and I covered his car with snow. The first story is Depth from the Grave, a story of money. My grandma told me this story recently about how her brother got his A kicked from the grave. My grandma comes from a family of 5, 4 girls, 1 boy. My great-grandfather Hank was ecstatic with the boy. We will call him Jack. One more important thing is that my great-grandfather ran a very successful company that made high-end clothing and bathroom silks, towels, and bathrobes. He made a fortune with this company and made sure everyone who worked for the company got his fair share. He also looked after the family. All his children got an education. All his children got the chance to get their driver's license. It was in the 1960s, so it was a big deal back then. They were the first in my hometown with a car, radio, and TV. My great-grandfather treated everyone equal. That changed when his first and only son was born. He already had 4 girls, and now finally a son. The roadmap was laid out for him. He would be the heir to his company. So began the upbringing of Jack. He was, let's say, a kid with a mouth. This wasn't bad per se. The thing was that his father allowed it. Jack got kicked from his first school. Jack got caught for shoplifting. Jack got kicked from his second school. Jack got caught joyriding, and so on and so on. Hank did not sit Jack down and told him the severity of his actions, but he would shrug it and tell his wife, great-grandmother Anna, that it was just childhood quirks. Anna tried to make something out of Jack, but it was a lost cause. Jack became 18, and Hank decided that it was the time to introduce him into the company. The company did better than ever, and the whole family was involved. Jack began at the bottom of the ladder and had to work his way up. This is where Jack began to shine. With shine, my grandmother meant that her brother was not a bright light at school, but he was a hard worker and had a nose for business, not so much for people. Jack was being an A as per usual and got married to his first Karen. His first wife was a Karen. She wanted to start her own company, and her father-in-law Hank wanted to retire. She pushed Jack to take over quickly and push the rest of the family out. Jack listened to her and talked to his father, how he was ready, and how his sisters and their husbands were tearing the company apart if they would stay in their leadership roles. The thing was that only one daughter and son-in-law were involved in the company at this point. 1980. My grandmother oversaw the seamstresses and the quality department, and my grandfather oversaw the financial and the suppliers. Karen wanted full control and started a little fire in the family. She started a rumor that grandfather stole from the company. I do not know what transpired, but in the end my great-grandfather bought out all the family, and Jack bought out great-grandfather. The company was Jack and Karen's company now, and things went tits up pretty quickly. Seamstresses quit, bills were not paid, and Jack had to take a loan from great-grandfather. The family company were barely scraping by, and Karen left Jack because he could not provide for him. It became apparent that Jack could not make it work, and was looking for a way out. After a while, great-grandfather had seen enough, and bought back the remnants of his company, and sold it to a bigger company that wanted to expand. This made the wealth he amassed even bigger. He did set up different banking accounts for his children, and said that if someone is in need, they could take money from that account. He told Jack his cut was smaller, as he was the reason he sold the company, and that he was let down by the carelessness his son had run his company into the ground. Jack was angry, and told his father that he could make it work if he had more time. It remained a sour point between the two of them. Things went well for a while, but Jack married a second time with a woman named Helen. Helen, like Karen, wanted her own business. Jack agreed and took money from the account in order to start Helen's company. The business was a little barbershop and ran pretty well. They were spending their money on luxury and did not save any money. After a while, my grandmother got a call from her little brother Jack if he could store some goods in her garage. My grandfather did not trust Jack and told him no, and grandmother did not agree, but they agreed to it. A few weeks later, Jack got caught for possession of stolen goods and drug smuggling. It was not a surprise, but nonetheless a letdown for my great-grandfather Hank. This time, he would not help Jack, and told him that he would no longer stand behind him. After a few years, Jack got out and was again a divorced man. He married again and divorced another 3 times, and each time he gave these women a business and lived lavishly. New cars, big houses, expensive vacations. In 2013, great-grandfather befell ill. It was clear that he was not going to make it, and took his final days in stride. At this time, Jack became very buddy-buddy, and started to help great-grandfather sell some stuff. At some point, my grandmother sat down with her father, and asked him where the money went for the sold stuff, and great-grandfather told her not to worry about it. He took care of it in his will. After his 95th birthday, he passed away quiet and in peace. After his funeral, they all went to listen to the will of their father, all except Jack, who had given the power of attorney to my grandmother to sign the will in his place. All the children got their fair share, but at the end, the notary public tells them to sign the papers, and the inheritance is completely theirs. At some point, my grandma called my dad. She's inherited some collateral papers, all sorts of papers that stated that someone owed my great-grandfather money. My father said that she has to call a lawyer's office to get the money from these papers. A few days after this call to the lawyer's office, my grandmother gets a call from her brother. Why was she taking his money from the inheritance? My grandmother tells him she's inherited some collateral papers and that she wants to get the money from them. Jack was furious and told her that that was illegal. Jack was wrong. Great-grandfather had documented every penny his son had loaned from him and constructed his will in such a way that the rest of his children could get that part of their money from their money drain of a brother. Also, great-grandfather found out Jack stole from him. You see, Jack was putting the money he made from the sold stuff on his own banking account instead of giving it to his father. Great-grandfathers confided in a letter why he did this. He was done with his son. All the lying, the careless things he had done to his company, all the money he had blown, and not taking any responsibility. He gave his final lesson to his son from the grave. The second story is, don't want to trim your bushes? I'll make you remove them completely. We'd been living in a mid/upper-class street in my town for around 10 years now. Due to regulations that our real estate agent didn't mention when selling it to my mom and dad, our foundations were set lower than the ones of our neighbors, which was not much of a problem, until the neighbor right in front of us. We have a small sideway in the street, where our and other houses are located, so our houses are just 4 meters apart from each other. Started to grow bushes to seal off his garden from the outside world. When we noticed them getting bigger, we did what every person would do, and jokingly reminded him to please keep the bushes in check, so they don't grow too big. They ignored it for as long as they lived there, which freaked my mother out. She's mentally ill, which ultimately led her to not being able to really work anything but a 450-euro job anymore, despite her only being in her late 40s. Me and my brother weren't able to clean our front yard as often as it needs to be cleaned, due to school and university being very stressful. We would have to clean it on the daily basis even in summer, because their bushes were shedding leaves left and right. Another thing that was annoying was that our rain drains for our front porch and garage were stuffed up with the leaves and would regularly overflow. My neighbors then moved out about 1 year ago, and a new couple moved in, who we first thought were nice. Turns out they were even worse than the other neighbors, and even mouthier. They made very clear that the sealed-off garden in their house having a higher foundation than ours and the rest of our neighbors' properties were the main reasons they bought it, and they won't change anything about it. My mom was getting so freaked out about all that. Keep in mind that she's ill, that she was close to selling the house. The neighbor kept being annoying as hell, and even threw parties in his garden, which oftentimes were way too loud, and kept all the neighbors awake, resulting in us or one of our neighbors having to call the police. So one day my mother looked out the front door and snapped after seeing how many leaves and other SH from the neighbors' bushes were laying in our front yard. She ran out into the garage, grabbed a lawn bag, put a bunch of the stuff that was laying in our front yard into it, and threw them in front of my neighbor's door. Illegal in Germany. A few hours later my neighbor came to us, being petty and all smug, saying he would sue us, and that we would have to pay loads and loads of money for ruining his front yard with our garbage, etc. Afterwards, he took photos of our house and even zoomed into our windows, illegal as well, which I was lucky to see through my window and record him doing it. I then proceeded to look into the city regulations and soon found out that we couldn't really do anything about their leaves falling on our front yard, but there's an extra clause in the regulations, which states that this only applies for as long as the other party's living conditions are not compromised. When our neighbors then went through with his lawsuit, I was completely prepared to ruin his day. The judge wanted to make it a quick case, but our lawyer showed her all the evidence that clearly showed him that his leaves were 1, compromising our living quality by blocking our drains with his garbage, and 2, he was breaking privacy laws by filming our house without consent. Further, my mom has a disabled ID due to her illness, which combined with us telling her, the judge, for how long we had to endure all of this, led to the charges against us being dropped and him having to pay a fee for breaking privacy laws, and him having to do something against his bushes. My neighbor was then given 2 options on how he could proceed. 1, he somehow managed to stop the leaves from falling on our property, or he has to tear everything down and has to build another form of protection, which would not compromise our living quality. He had 1 month to find a solution, but ended up not finding one, which led to him having to tear down the whole thing. My mom was happier than I had ever seen her in the past 10 years, and sat through the whole thing. The only thing that was missing to make all this perfect was her having popcorn. The last story is parking revenge. I live in a really small and tight street with super limited parking spots, but it's like an unwritten rule that every parks in front of their place, not someone else's. Recently, this D-bag moved in across the street and he has 4 cars. 3 that just sit around, and 1 that he drives daily, and he has those junkers parked all over, taking other people's spots, causing problems. I've on a few occasions left a small note on his car, asking him politely to please not park in my spot, and still he keeps doing it, and it really peeves me off, because when he does take my spot, I have to park a few streets over, and walk for about 5 minutes to get home. Not far, I know, just annoying, because I don't take other people's spots. So, on to the actual story if you're still with me. 3 days ago overnight, we had a massive snowfall. It was up to my knees and I'm 6'4". I wake up and need to go to the store to buy groceries, so I get a shovel and spend about 30 minutes digging my car out of the parking spot. And I shovel all the snow out of the spot, so it's easy for me to get back in my spot with my groceries when I get back. While I'm doing that, the D-bag comes out and leaves, and he looks at me while I'm shoveling snow. We even make eye contact, so he clearly saw me clearing snow out of my spot. So I go to the store and return some 20 minutes later, and what do I see? The effing D has stolen my spot. The parking spot that he saw me spend 30 minutes clearing. I instantly get raging mad, and I honk my horn outside his house to try to get him to move his car. That doesn't work, although I thought I saw his curtains move when I honked. So I calm myself down and get out, walk up to his door and knock to see if I can get him to move his car. He doesn't come to the door, but I can clearly hear him inside. I waited until it was about 1 a.m. to be sure he was asleep, keeping an eye out the entire day to see if he moves his car, which he didn't. So I go out with my shovel and I shovel all the snow I could find in a massive radius around his car, and pack it tight under his car, and around it, and a massive pile on top of it. Took me about 2 to 3 hours. You couldn't see his car anymore, and I was 100% sure he couldn't drive out of the pile. I packed it super tight. I go to bed feeling happy with a job well done. The next morning I wake up to a loud knocking on my door, so I get out of bed and go to the door. There he is, furious that his car is in a snow pile, and he's going to be late for work, and tells me to get my A outside and dig his car out of the pile. I calmly walk outside, look at the pile and say, "Oh, must have snowed again last night. Unlucky that your car is parked exactly where it all came down," and give him a little smirk to go with the joke. Walk back inside and close my door, and I can hear him outside for the next hour or so trying to get his car out of the pile. I hope you love these stories. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to know when the new video comes out.